Hi, I'm here with Karl today, and I met Karl on the comment threads on Paul VanderKlay's channel, and I think we're going to have a very fascinating conversation.
Well, I hope so. That's what
Well,
we're here for. I mean, typically the conversations on Paul's channel are very good. And now, after you invited me to potentially do this, of course, I started looking at quite a few of your videos, and they are very good also. Obviously, the audience is not quite that large yet. I hope.
uh-huh.
I wish you the best. But
Well, I thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk with you today,
no, that's
and
great.
I'm hoping you can tell me a little bit about your background, and so something about your life, but then also something about how you got interested in Jordan Peterson, and then how you
Yeah.
navigated over to Paul VanderKlay's thing. And then if we have time, I would also, you mentioned on one of your comments that you indicated that you know something about control theory. And I thought it would be
Yeah.
to hear something
Yeah, I
about that.
studied. I studied a little bit. I mean, I don't have any real formal training. I study all this, you know,
So I thought that would be interesting.
otherwise known as cybernetics sometimes. But yeah, systems control theory is very important when you come to talk about complex systems and how to make them stable.
Mm-hmm.
How a complex system remains stable as opposed to divergent and go out of control and go into chaotic
Oh,
behavior as opposed to
wow.
stable behavior.
Yes, I definitely want
So
to.
therefore, that's why I had some interest in studying that, because it's related to complexity theory, which is really, one of my big things that I keep hammering, and I pointed out to Paul a couple of times, and he eventually showed up, I don't know, a while back, he put up that one slide in one of his presentations, or one of his, I think it was a presentation, it wasn't a discussion, but where he compared, simple systems versus complicated system and complex systems. So I'm the one that pointed out to him that you seem to be confusing complicated systems with complex systems.
I remember those comments.
Right. So, in colloquial vocabulary, it can be thought as the same, but in the formal theoretical sense of the word, they're very different. And so you have to be very careful when you use those terms.
Okay, well, let's get into that a little
Talk
bit
about,
later, but at the beginning, let me hear a little bit more about you.
yeah, right. Well, yeah, be careful what you ask for, because I think you can already hear that I have an accent a little bit. It's not much. Most people have a hard time figuring it out, but I was born and raised in France. I'm an American. I spent 24 years in the U.S. Air Force. I was a fighter pilot of all things in the Air Force. My dad was in the U.S. Army, and he was stationed in France, way back, and met my mom, who is French, there. And so I ended up growing, not my entire youth there, but I finished my high school diploma there, so I have a French baccalaureate, and then I moved to the States permanently after that, and I went to school at UC Berkeley, not too far from where you live, and did my bachelor's degree in engineering physics there. Then I did some graduate studies in physics, and later on I got an MBA, and but this was like continuing education kind of stuff where I wasn't attending on campus. It was more like night classes and things like that. So I'm kind of like half French. French is my first language. English my second. I'm also fluent in German, because even though I was born and raised in France, I'm an American citizen. The country where I've lived the longest in my life is Germany, actually. So that's kind of an interesting fact as well. And of course, I had formal training in German in high school and a little bit in college. But then, living well over 20 years in Germany, I learned German pretty fluently. And so I've lived in Europe, a long time. And now me and my family moved to Orlando here in Florida 7 years ago, almost exactly, from Germany. After I retired from the Air Force, I stayed in Germany as a defense contractor, working for the Air Force as a civilian. So that's it, basically. But as far as my general interests, I'm very interested in philosophy, sciences, philosophy of science, but it's like evolutionary theory, particularly evolutionary psychology, evolutionary epistemology. And by the way, that's one of those things that attracted me to, it's kind of a segue, but attracted me to initially Jordan Peterson, because he was one of the people that was talking my language there,
But did you discover him before he got on anybody else's radar?
So yeah. Well, yeah, before he became really famous, yes, definitely. Yes. I was watching some of his lectures that were on YouTube. Now he was starting to make some waves with, his, I can't remember the exact timing. Well, it was just before, but it was about in the time frame where his opposition to Bill C-16 in Canada, put him on the scene, so to speak. Of course, he took off, and but pretty much immediately, I was very interested in what he had to say. I thought it was very interesting, and then of course I found, from there, as most, I think, of the people ended up on Paul VanderKlay's channel came from that. I think most people, and that was the same thing for me. I got a link and say, hey, that sounds interesting. He's commenting on Jordan Peterson, and I was just astounded by Paul. I mean, it was incredible that, a Calvinist pastor was so open-minded and so willing to talk about things that I would have thought would have made him uncomfortable, perhaps. But it appeared not to, And so that really attracted me to his channel, and also the quality of the people that he was reviewing. And then eventually, when he started having, guests, I can't say all of them were equally interesting, but usually you learn something from everybody that he had on there. But some of the guests were really, really interesting. And I don't comment on all his whole thing, but when I thought it was important, especially when it seemed to me that he was often talking about complex systems when he already meant complicated systems, and I really wanted him to understand the difference, because that is crucial to my philosophy. The distinction between what a complex system is and a complicated system is critical to understanding the world. So that's something that bridges that gap. As soon as I understood complexity theory, I could see I could bridge the gap in understanding between, people who have a more of a bent towards, you could say religious teachings or learnings or understandings of the world. In a more general sense, you could say people who believe in the supernatural in some form or other, right? And of course, on the other hand, you have the Sam Harris types who believe in a strictly materialist or perhaps physicalist, as John Vervaeke would say, view of the world. And so I wasn't satisfied with either one of those views. And when I started studying complexity theory, and one of the characteristics of complex system is the emergence of new characteristics, where a system becomes more than the sum of its parts.
Right.
To me, it became obvious that was the gap in between. So this binary view, it had to be either a strictly materialist or physicalist view of the universe, or if you rejected that, and I think it's right to reject it. I absolutely agree that it cannot be all physical or material. But on the other hand, I consider myself a naturalist. So this discovery of complexity theory and emergence allowed me intellectually to bridge that gap. And so there is a third way. There is something in between. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But then it got me into this discussion with a couple of the commentators on the, some of the Paul's videos, or maybe even on, Professor Vervaeke's videos. I can't remember which one, but I think that John Vervaeke calls himself a physicalist still, but he adds the caveat that he's a non-reductionist physicalist. I think that's right. So then you get into, definitions and, which definition is the best. If I understand it correctly, I think Professor Vervaeke and I have the same view of this. We just have a slightly different set of definitions. So I don't like to call myself a physicalist.
Well, because you think of physicalist being strictly looking at things as being complicated, like mechanistic, as opposed
to I think that's right. Now, John Vervaeke calls himself a physicalist, and I know he doesn't believe that, right?
Uh-huh.
He says he's a non-reductionist physicalist. So just as I do, he believes that in complex systems, there emerges certain characteristics that are no longer reducible to the sum of their parts. So they are not, to me, that's why I don't like calling myself a physicalist, because those emerging properties are not physical. So like consciousness, to me, David Chalmers, the cognitive scientist, very famous, he thinks, there are many emergent systems in the universe, but he thinks consciousness is the only, I think he uses the term radically emergent. So it's like a complete break from what you think of as the material universe or the physical universe is made of, right? And I don't want to get much into that. It's not really relevant here. But obviously, consciousness is like the prime example of what I would consider an emergent property in the universe. So the difference between me and somebody who would say, well, can't you see this proves the existence of God or a supernatural realm? I would say no. I agree that there are non-physical entities in the universe, but the difference comes where you make the assumption that because it's not physical, therefore there has to be this insubstantial supernatural entity that is independent. And this is the key point here, the key concept. Is that supernatural or let's say non-physical emergent property completely independent of the physical world, or does it still need that physical substrate to even exist? Right? So if I say my consciousness is an emergent property of the processes in my brain, to somebody who believes in, maybe a more religious view or supernaturalistic view, they would say, well, then that consciousness is completely independent of the physical world. My view is, no, it's an emergent property. It is not physical, but if you remove the physical substrate, it will no longer exist. All right? So to me, like the concept of an immortal soul, while I don't miss it out of hand, is difficult for me to grasp.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what
I understand what you're saying, yes.
So there is a difference between saying, I think John Vervaeke pointed this out, and I can't remember the exact terms that he used, but I think he was pointing to the same idea that, yes, emergent properties are novel in the universe. They cannot be reduced to simple physical systems in the sense that they are more than the sum of the physical systems. But if you remove the physical system, they'll vanish with it. So, for example, the typical examples are of complex systems that you see all the time are like the concept of temperature. You know, the temperature, and it doesn't make sense to talk about a single atom or particle having a temperature. The concept of temperature arises from the interaction of many, many, many particles, right, as a gas, and they move around, and then the very, the emergent feature called temperature emerges. Same thing with people have used like ant colonies. So the ant colony, as it, is a very complicated, actually a complex system.
Yes, yeah.
But so the two can be both, so complicated systems can be complex, vice versa, but they're not the same thing. So the ant colony, like 100 ants cannot form an ant colony. They'll just die. They can't function as an ant colony. But then you put more and more ants, and at some point, the concept of an ant colony emerges. Same thing for in the human world. And Paul's pointed this out. He's done a very good job about pointing this out. He said, well, for example, is the city of New York a real thing? Is the U.S. government, or he uses Uncle Sam as an example, is Uncle Sam a real thing? To me, these are all emergent things that don't equate. You can't just simply equate the actions of every single individual in the city. It's more than that. Their interaction comes up with a bunch of novel properties that you would never have been able to predict. So the city is more than a sum of its parts. Just as the ant colony is, just like how we said, the gas now has a temperature because of the interaction of its particles. And of course, the ultimate emergent property is consciousness. But if you remove the parts, if you remove the particles, if you have no particles, it makes no sense to talk about temperature anymore. Temperature of what?
Well, so are you game for a couple of questions?
Oh, sure, yes.
Okay. So one of the things that I notice, well, I notice a lot of different things because of the way I look at art, but one thing that comes across my salience is this idea of randomness, and that for any system to function and to be able to be self-adaptive, there needs to be at least, or it needs to be just the right amount, the Goldilocks, just the right amount of randomness. And I was listening to Neil Teese talk, and he was talking about how in ant colonies, there are always a few ants that aren't in the line on the way to the food, and they're random. It's not like they know they're out there scouting, but they're just enough randomness in the system so that if something happens to the line, if some foot comes down in the middle of the line, those little outside ants can still find their way around and find a food source again. And
that's exactly right.
And it works that way in fluid mechanics and in particle physics and in a lot of other areas. There has to be that little bit of randomness. So my question always is, how is it that we end up with just the right amount of randomness in those systems? I think that's a very interesting question.
Well, first of all, I would question whether we always end up with the right amount of randomness. It's kind of in evolutionary theory, that's always an open question. And I think that's something that Paul has pointed out many times. I think in his discussions with Adam, especially, Adam, I can't remember his last name, but he's from the channel.
Adam Friended?
Yeah, Adam Friended, that's it. So that which survives in evolution is automatically, the true and one thing. But Paul is correct to point out, well, it depends what time frame you look at, right? So I think that's a little too simplistic. But yeah, you do need, first of all, you're absolutely right that you do need always an amount of randomness. But that really ties into something. Of course, I was well aware of that a long time ago, but that Jordan Peterson keeps pointing out that there is a right balance between the safety of your known current environment and conditions and state, right, the status quo, and the need to be able to explore the unknown, right? Too static. If you're, let's say you have a system that's perfectly fitted to its environment. If the environment changes even a little bit, the system will die, because being perfectly fitted means that, yes, if the conditions don't change, you're the optimal system to survive in that environment. But the counterpart to that is if anything changes in the environment, and the environment changes all the time, then you're going to die. So you need a certain amount of flexibility, and the way flexibility is embodied in an evolutionary system is through randomness. So that's why you have random variation, genetically. You have also, well, okay, then when we get to human culture, also follows an evolutionary process, but then it becomes a little different, because then it's a combination of randomness, but with some rationality thrown into the mix, right? So we don't want to oversell rationality there. So we still need the randomness, and we still.
Well, but so that's.
But there is the introduction of that factor.
That's where I think constraint, all of the issues around constraint come in, because let's take the example of, I don't know if you have seen Sharon Glotzer's, I mean, there's millions of videos out there, but there's a physicist named Sharon Glotzer who did a YouTube, well, she did a lecture that got put on YouTube, and she was showing the kinds of studies that they've been doing in particle physics over the last 15 to 20 years, where they've learned that if they confine even man-made nanoparticles in a small enough space and remove all of the space from the particles, that the particles will self-organize into a crystalline structure.
Right.
It comes from removing the space. So it's in this very tightly constrained environment, you get this low entropy, completely rigid structure, which sounds a lot like Jordan Peterson's order.
Right,
right. Stultified, right?
Well,
Too much order comes
that's the
from
thing.
a constraint that doesn't leave any space. The minute you leave some space, then a little bit of randomness is allowed, and entropy. So entropy has an opportunity to begin growing, right? And
Yes.
the information is where the entropy is.
Correct. So in general, complex systems need to be able to adapt at the local level, right? As soon as somebody tries to impose an order from the top, so to speak, they tend to collapse, right? So, and we, in the human world, we saw that in the 20th century with the collapse of communism and, the untold millions of deaths that followed. It was a clear example of not understanding that human society is a complex system and confusing it with a merely complicated system. Mm-hmm. So Marxist theory, and a bunch of, not just Marx, but a bunch of others, their big mistake, and you can't completely blame them because Marx had no idea about complexity theory, and that came way later. So, you can cut him some slack on that, although I wouldn't cut him some slack in many other areas. But
well, fascist theory would fall in the same category.
Yeah, well, it's many theories. Even people, which surprises me, but people like Sam Harris, who thinks that they can organize the world, in a better way to organize, quote unquote, human flourishing, seem to me they don't understand complexity. Mm-hmm. So, and that's where, systems control theory, cybernetics come into play, because you do have to have the right kinds of rules of interactions at the local level to be able, for a complex system that it's made of disparate parts, to establish its own order. So the order that we see around us. And, you know, the way I was first introduced to complexity theory was by, you know, an economist, Friedrich Hayek.
Oh, yes.
he never uses the term, but the concept he kept coming to over and over again when he was talking about economic system is the result of human action, but not of human design. In other words,
kind of a
millions of people.
Kind of a distributed cognition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And you never know what's going to emerge from these things ahead of time. You know, it makes, the good thing is it makes for a fundamentally unpredictable world. So I don't believe in physical determinism. I think it's false. I think I can prove it's false. You know, it makes for what, you know, the philosopher of science, Karl Popper, called the open universe. So the universe is open to novelty. It's not predetermined by its initial conditions. And so new things emerge, and these things feed back on themselves, and, you know, from emergence comes new emergence, and novelty in the universe is completely unpredictable, which is a good thing, because I hate to be in a universe where, you know, in theory, even it always bothered me, you know, Laplace's demon. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept, right? From, like, I think it was in the 18th century, or maybe 17th.
You talking about the
after Newton came up with his theory of gravity, and, you know, and his various laws of motion, there was a French physicist, Laplace, who came up with the idea that, well, you know, if we know all the laws of the universe, and we knew the initial conditions of the universe at any given time, then we can predict everything that's going to happen in the future with complete certainty. And we can also retrodict everything that has happened in the universe in the past with complete certainty. It's only a thought experiment, because you'd have to have, you know, you'd have to know the conditions of every single particle in the universe. But in theory, he was saying that's, you know, it should be possible. And I just didn't like that idea. I don't think it's right. I think, in fact, I can prove it's wrong.
Well, that would not be a part of quantum physics anymore, would it?
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. When quantum, yeah, well, of course, this was way before quantum physics even came on the scene. So, of course, when quantum physics appeared in the beginning of the 20th century, you know, it was kind of a shock, because it appeared the universe was completely random at a certain level. And of course, Einstein, who was one of the founders of quantum mechanics, you know, he never wanted to accept this, and he fought it the rest of his life. So he was looking for a way which explained that the randomness that we see is actually just a fact that represents our ignorance of deeper variables that are, you know, that we don't know yet. But once we know about it, we'll figure out that the randomness was only apparent. You know, it's only a stand-in for our inability to calculate the exact, you know, positions of particles right now. But eventually, physics will evolve to a deeper explanation, and then we'll be able to figure out that this randomness is not fundamental. But it turns out that every indication so far is that he was wrong, and that the randomness is truly fundamental. But the fact that now we had a physics that was no longer deterministic but random really didn't help the philosophers trying to deal with problems like free will and, you know, determinism and things like that, because I think it's pretty bad that, you know, if everything is predetermined and, you know, our free will is illusory, that's bad. But to also say that we're just subject to random forces, and, you know, that what happens, and there's nothing we can do about it. is not any better. So there has to be a better way.
Well, it seems to me there's a big gap between acknowledging that there is randomness in the universe and coming to the conclusion that we are the result of random forces. I think those are two different things. I mean,
yeah, well, I would agree.
My mind, obviously, I come from a presupposition that's different than your presupposition,
Mm-hmm.
at least based on the thinking that I've done throughout my life. But to me, the randomness is a kind of a gift. The varieties of randomness that we see that keep the systems going always seem to be ideally suited to whatever system it's keeping going.
Yes.
And you know, when you really get into Jordan Peterson's theory of anomaly, and I've read his chapter on anomaly 3 times in Maps of Meaning, and I keep uncovering deeper and deeper and deeper layers of stuff.
It's a hard book to read, isn't it?
But when you think about anomaly, and just think about all the different places that anomaly shows up, to me, that anomaly is like the randomness in the system, but it's always ideally suited to the situation, which seems like a gift.
Well, yeah, so it gets us back to where we got this. You know, I got us off a little bit off line of discussion that you started, but to get back to, is it surprising that the degree of randomness is exactly what it needs to be? To me, it's not, because I'm an evolutionist, right? So I would say my response would be, well, yes, the systems that had the right degree of randomness are the ones that are surviving today. And it doesn't mean that there aren't systems in the world today that have different degrees of randomness, but you know, it remains to be seen whether they'll still be there 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 1,000,000 years, or 1,000,000,000 years from now, right? So we never know what the exact correct degree of randomness is. But to me, it's not surprising that most systems would have a degree of randomness that has allowed them to survive to this point, right? So it's not a mystery to me. But that systems, it's a great observation that you make. That's exactly right. But to me, that's not a mystery. It seems logical that if the systems have survived so far and evolved to this point, that means they probably had a pretty good measure, you know, a balance between a randomness and determinism, right? So between the known and the unknown, you know, the search for, you know, the exploring into the unknown. Mm-hmm. So that's a very important concept. That's the way systems keep evolving. That's the way they keep adapting. That's the way they stay flexible. And of course, one of the key evolutionary advantages that systems can have is the ability to adapt to different environments. So it's kind of like a meta-evolutionary concept. So you know, the first level of evolution would be to adapt to a given environment. And then the next would be to evolve the capability to adapt to different environments when the environment changes. Now, of course, you can't have a completely radical change in environment and expect whether it's an organism or a system, whatever it is, to survive. But you know, the more gradual types of changes, the universe works very slowly. I mean, you know, apparently it's 13.5 billion years old and something like that. I mean, it's unfathomable types of times. I mean, in comparison.
So you have a wide background in evolutionary theory, and
yes.
when I heard Brett Weinstein talking the other day, and I've heard him talk before, one question always pops into my mind: the way he uses language. And maybe he's getting this from Dawkins or somebody. I never listened to any of those people, so I don't know what they were saying.
Yeah, I'm not impressed with Dawkins, let's put it that way. But.
Yeah, he talks often about how the gene wants to do this. The gene
right.
or the cell wants, the cell desires, the cell has this survival instinct.
Yeah, I wouldn't put too much.
Well, but there must be something that wants to survive. Otherwise, how would systems have developed the ability to adapt to different environments?
No,
So
I mean, I think
go back
he's
all
using
the way
that language, but that's just typical human tendency to anthropomorphize everything, you know. And
well, okay, but
he
here's my
wants
question.
to.
Here's
He's
my
not
question,
literally meaning that.
Let me go back to roll it all the way back to the very beginning. There's one cell in the very beginning.
Yes.
And we don't know where that one cell got its
That's
life. Okay.
Yes, that's still a mystery, although there are many potential avenues and theories that, you know, are, but you're correct. I mean, right now nobody knows how that first cell evolved, or that first,
so we have this first
what you would define as a living organism. I don't know whether a virus, you know, like a virus is right on that line between what you would call living and, you know, in some ways it's a living organism, but in some ways it barely meets the definition. But anyway, I suppose it is.
But you have some living organism.
Right.
In order for it, the way that typical evolutionary theory discusses how that organism then adapted to the environment to become a more complex organism, it had to have a will to survive. Where did that come from?
Well, yeah, well, a will to survive is, I don't know, I mean, it's not, like, I'm not a panpsychist, so unlike JP,
Mm-hmm.
you know, JP Marceau, I don't believe atoms have any part of, you know, psychic or, you know, of mental quality or anything like this. So when we say will to survive, you have to be very careful how you say that. Like, does a virus really have a will to survive? No, it's not. It's its structure is made so that it is able to survive in a given environment. I don't think it has any will to do anything. It just does.
Well,
Like,
but you just used the
like
language.
a plant, does a tree have a will?
Hold on a second. You
Yeah,
just
okay.
used the language. You said, I'm going really slow because I want to follow everything that you said.
Right.
You said a virus is made to do a certain thing.
It's selected. It's selected to do a certain thing. In other words, if
But
it
we're
was,
still talking about the first one.
yeah, the first one, that's the first one has to do with chemistry, right? So it's not, and that's something, you know, again, it's a very serious topic of research and debate, and you know, I don't even know if we'll ever know. But that presumption is that, you know, the first strands of what you know, the precursors of what would be DNA now, and RNA and things like that, initially were just chemical. I mean, we know those are actually made of chemical compounds. So, but how these first chemical compounds got together in a way which they were able to self-replicate is still a great mystery, right? So how they became autocatalytic, in other words, that they were able to get energy from their environment and use that energy to, first of all, survive in a way that all they had to do was survive long enough for them to reproduce. And the reproduction at that level is simply make a mirror copy of yourself. Because, of course, sexual reproduction didn't appear on the evolutionary scene till way, way later. So, you know, initial cells, and until very late in the evolutionary tree, so to speak, you know, you have mitosis, you just have cells that split and make twin cells. Right? So yeah, it's still a mystery how that very first one happened. But once it does, though, you know, I would suppose, my supposition, and there were millions and millions and billions of these cells that appeared, and most of them, you know, the vast, 99.99999% just weren't viable, and they just disappeared. And then the one, it only took is one to make the cut, so to speak, and be able to survive in that environment through, you know, random it's random. I mean, you know, the chemical elements combine themselves in a random, more or less random manner. Now, it's not completely random because they still have to obey the laws of physics and the laws of chemistry. So the, you know, ions, certain ions combine with each other depending on their atomic structure and whatnot. So it's not like anything goes, but there's still a lot of possibilities for a lot of variations.
Have you listened at all to J.M. Tour, T-O-U-R?
Yeah, I'm not very familiar. I've heard the name, but I'm not real familiar with.
Well, his specialty is nanotechnology, and he's apparently one of the foremost nanotechnology experts in the country. But his background is organic chemistry, and he gives a very compelling discussion of the difficulties of getting the chemical structures together in such a way that a cell could actually have happened, because certain chemical combinations that are made have to be kept in very, very specific conditions in order to be able to move on to the next level. But apparently there's thousands and even millions of years separating these various combinations according to evolutionary theory. And no way that these things could have survived in the original combination to get to the next level. So it's a little bit more complicated than anything I can explain, but you might want to listen to him sometime because he's...
I will, but I know there are many people that say, you know, it could not have happened naturally, you know, by natural processes, because it's so complicated and so unlikely, you know, probabilistically. But then again, you know, here's a book that myself and John Vervaeke happened to be reading exactly at the same time by total coincidence. I mean, you know, I was commented on one of his videos. So that's Stuart Kaufman's. It's called The Sacred, right? So by total coincidence, we happen to be reading the same book. And from the title, you can see why John Vervaeke would be reading this, because The Sacred, and it's a fascinating book, but of course he takes a different approach. Right? Now he doesn't say he can explain it, but he said there are very promising approaches to potentially explain how, you know, that first living organism, first cell, whatever you want to call it, might have appeared. So, you know, to him, and he's, you know, he's a scientist, he's very respected as well. So I definitely don't have the answer to that. I mean, if I did, I'd have a Nobel Prize in physics. But,
yeah.
So yeah, I don't. And I, of course, I'm not, you know, I'm not a full, I mean, my background is in physics, but of course I didn't, you know, I don't have even a PhD in that. So
what was your early work? Did you use physics at all in your early career?
No, I was a fighter pilot in the Air Force.
Oh, well, okay. So
of course it's a little technical, but it's you know, I didn't really use physics, but I never lost my interest in what was the latest in physics. I read a lot of you know, I love, like, for example, Roger Penrose. He's just absolutely
fascinating guy. Yeah.
But because I have a background in physics, I'm able to understand not some of the, you know, very high level concepts that I get lost at some point. I mean, even people with PhDs get lost at some point. So obviously, you know, at high level, but at least I'm able to at least grasp some of the most fundamental concepts that what he's talking about. But I think, you know, my general view on these things is I prefer to say that I don't know, as opposed to speculating that, well, let's reach for a supernatural explanation right now, because that's the only way we can come up with. I'm comfortable saying that we don't know. Now, you know, if I could see a compelling argument and there was suddenly a consensus among most scientists, it wouldn't even take all of them, but it's a significant number, not even the majority, but it's a big minority of scientists suddenly said, yeah, we all agree now, it is mathematically impossible for life to have emerged from mere, you know, chemical elements, and we all give up. Yes, there must be something else, you know, some supernatural And by the way, as a parenthesis, saying that, well, it's aliens that did it is no explanation at all, right? Because then you've just pushed the question one further back, right? So you say, oh, the DNA, the only explanation is because it came from some alien world. It's like, well, okay, well, but then how did that alien world come to be, right? So
Yeah.
To me, that's no explanation.
So the multiverse has the same problem, right? I mean, it's just.
Well, I don't believe in the multiverse. I think.
Well, but I mean, it has
like
the
Sean
same
Carroll,
problem as aliens.
Sean Carroll keeps talking about that, but yeah, I don't know. To me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
And I noticed that you're not a
Versions.
fan of Don Hoffman.
No, I'm not a fan of Don Hoffman. Absolutely not. I mean, all it took was for me to watch one video. Of course, I think I heard his name mentioned by Paul and other places. So I finally said, okay, well, I'll look into it, and I'm curious. And I didn't read his book, but because I wanted to see, okay, is this for real? All right. So I watched a couple of videos on YouTube, but all it took is one video. I watched the whole thing, but I said, no, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. None.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very easy to see. You know about confirmation bias. I mean, obviously you know about these kinds of things. You are obviously a very well-read person. You've read a lot of things. So confirmation bias, we all have it. It's very common. The best we can do is try to fight it. I happen to have a personality where it's a little less prone because I wouldn't say I'm a contrarian, because a contrarian to me is somebody that automatically will take the opposite point of view of anybody. That whatever, if somebody says A, they'll automatically say B. That's not true of me, but my personality is of a nature to, if somebody says A, I won't automatically say B, but I will automatically start questioning, is this really true? Can I think of examples right now that would contradict what this person is saying? As opposed to most people will say, they'll think of things that confirm what the person is saying. Well, yeah, I remember this, this experience. That typically people, all they have to do is think of one or two personal experiences that seem to fit what this person said, and they say, that's it. He's got the answer. To me, it's the opposite. No, I need to think of, okay, what could this prove? And it's not because I want to be antagonistic. It's because just like John Vervaeke, I'm kind of anti-BS. I mean, I don't want to, John uses the term on a regular basis. Of course, there's the famous book on bullshit by Harry Frankfurt, which is, quite good. And Professor Vervaeke referred to that a couple of times in his lectures. But I just, I sort of kind of detect this. So in the case of Donald Hoffman, yeah, I mean, there's so many red flags there that I can't even, I don't even know where to start. But I mean, just to give you one example. So you're familiar with his favorite example for quote unquote, not maybe proving, he's not pushing that far, but illustrating his thesis that what we sense is just an interface with reality. It's a user interface with other consciousnesses. So there is no like intermediate reality, or if there is reality, it's not, he doesn't mean it in any way that the average person would think of as the real world. So his favorite example is the Australian jewel beetle, right?
Yes.
You know about that one, right?
Well, I've heard him use the example. I don't know the
right.
truth, but yeah.
Well, okay, but I think it's true, because I've read independent accounts that, factually, from a biological point of view, this is true. The Australian jewel beetle almost became extinct because Australians were throwing their beer bottles out in the desert, out in the outback there. And the Australian jewel beetle would try to mate with those bottles because it has the same color and maybe a similar texture, even though the shape is very different, I suppose, than the female, Australian jewel beetle. But they would try to mate with the beer bottles and instead of actual females. And that almost caused the extinction of that species of beetle. So to him, to Donald Hoffman, that shows that that reality doesn't really matter, that this beetle had this interface that was telling him to mate with something that's brownish color, you know, so the color was very similar, and maybe the shape or something, you know, some elements that to the beetle were the relevant, you know, the relevance realization or the salient features that told it this, you know, this is what you need to mate with. But to me, that proves exactly the opposite of what he wants to prove. Or it doesn't prove anything, but it illustrates the exact opposite. Because what is the most succinct way to say or to summarize the cause of the almost extinction of the Australian jewel beetle? You should go like in just like 6 or 7 words. Well, the simplest way is to say the beer bottle is not really a female jewel beetle. And when you've said the word really, you've said it all. In reality, the beer bottle is not a female jewel beetle. So the reason for the extinction is not some, you know, faulty user interface. It's because the beetle had a false representation of reality. Its model of reality was inadequate. And I could go on. I mean, if our senses were just an interface with reality, we would only need 1 sense. We don't need 5. We just need 1. It's sufficient. If evolution is parsimonious, you know, and doesn't waste energy on things, then let's just go with 1 sense. That's enough.
Well, what I'm wondering is if people like Donald Hoffman aren't kind of symptomatic of this way of looking at truth, because I've watched him speak before, and he talks a lot about how we evolved not for reality, but for fitness.
Correct.
And
but the two are not mutually incompatible, by the way, but okay.
Yeah, but I mean that's his shtick, right?
Right. That's what he says, yes.
And so when Paul VanderKlay talks about reality, he says reality is that which governs. Now, I don't know if you like it when he says that or not. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, you have to be careful about the sense of, you know, the word govern there, but yeah, I mean, the best definition, you want to hear the best definition of reality that I've ever heard? You know about the science fiction author Philip K. Dick, right?
Yes,
Of, well, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which became the movie, I can't even think of it, but anyway. The
only thing I'm familiar with of his is that Amazon series.
Oh yeah, right.
Well, in Germany.
Right.
The Man in the High Castle.
That's right. Correct. He's also the author of the books but also Total Recall.
Okay.
Minority Report. These all movies
okay.
based on some of these novels or short stories. But anyway, Philip K. Dick said, reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, still does not go away. Right? Mm-hmm. That's pretty good. And to me, that says what reality is. So
what I was going to say in my comment earlier, then what I was going to say is, and this definition works just fine for me too, that there's a sense in which reality and truth are stuck together.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's the thing. That's the confusion people have all the time. They use the word truth to and Jordan Peterson is completely guilty of this. You know, I love Jordan Peterson. He's one of my favorite people in the entire world. But when it came to his debate with Sam Harris about the nature of truth, it saddened me to have to take Sam Harris's side. I mean, because normally I would never do that. I really can't stand Sam Harris. And that's, you know, that's not the Christian thing to say. You have to love even your enemies. But Sam Harris has a vision of the world which I just cannot agree with in any way whatsoever. But anyway,
So I didn't hear their debate, so I'm not sure exactly what.
Right, but I don't, you know.
Hold on a second. I stayed away from it because I don't like tension. I don't like tension, but
Yes.
but I just want to finish up before, and I want to hear what you have to say, but I want to finish my point first of all, so you understand where I'm coming from. This idea that that Don Hoffman has, and other people, when they think about truth or reality as something that doesn't really exist. There are a lot of people who say, you know, well, truth is relative. It doesn't really exist. But and I've heard this morning I was listening to some other scientist who said, we cannot know what the truth is. And my mind immediately thought, well, that's because you're looking at truth as a what. Truth is not a what. Truth is a who. And once you understand that truth is a who, then, and this, and I know you and I have a little bit of disagreement about Jordan Peterson, and I think you might be right. I might have over-interpreted something that he said when I got the picture in my mind when I was listening to the biblical lectures, that Jordan Peterson is saying that Jesus Christ is the hinge point of history. And I may have overinterpreted that, because I remember seeing in one of your comments where you said, that's not true.
Well, I don't think that.
But
okay, well, go ahead.
Logos is the truth. He is the truth. The person, well, and that's why it's, that is why the flexibility is there for emergent systems, because when truth becomes a what, it becomes too tightly constrained, and it and all the problems that happen with too tight a constraint happen. Too much order.
Yes. But I think my concept of, you know, emergence within complex systems would take care of that. But, you know, perhaps, you know, I'm not sure. I have to think some more about this. But on the fact that there is such a thing as truth and reality, and that of course the two are tied in a way, and that's what I was going to make the point about, you know, Jordan Peterson's theory of truth.
Mm-hmm.
Don't keep forgetting that truth is something that applies to propositions, only to propositions. It makes no sense to say that something like an object is true. That's nonsense. So only a sentence, a proposition that somebody utters can be true or false. But when we say that something that somebody said is true or false, what we mean is the underlying reality that they are referring to, you know, say is real, it does exist, or no, you know, it does not exist, in which case it's false. Or that the relationship that they are claiming to exist between two different objects, and when I say objects, you know, they don't have to be material objects. They can be non-material objects like consciousness. You know? And that this relationship does obtain in reality, or it does not. You know, it's one or the other. So I'm definitely not a relativist of any kind. You know, not an epistemological relativist, not a moral relativist, not. And that brings up a point that we can discuss later if you want, if we have time, because of course, you know, we only have have limited time. But
well, we can always do this again.
But one of the things that attracted me to Jordan Peterson in the first place was I had been, I don't know if puzzled was the right term, but I had been intrigued by the fact that, for me, you know, I consider myself an agnostic. So I never call myself an atheist. I think it's, first of all, it's an antagonistic term to me. I don't need it. It's just provocative to me. I'd rather say I just don't know. You know, and if sometimes people kid me for that because, oh, you know, you're too cowardly to call yourself an atheist. And it's okay, well, fine. I don't care. But it's a non-religious person, you know. But I found I was getting along with my religious friends a lot better than with some of these people that were militant atheists or in some cases were not necessarily atheists, but they were moral relativists, truth relativists. They didn't believe that there was everybody has their own reality, everybody has their own truth. I just couldn't stand that. I felt much more comfortable, even if I would disagree with them, with some of my religious friends, including people from Latter-day Saints, in the armed forces. There were quite a few people that were Mormons, and they were great people. I mean, I got along with them fantastically. I think their religion, has issues, but it didn't take away from the fact that, at the very least, we all agreed that there was such thing as reality and truth, and also that there were things that were greater than us, that just we simply couldn't understand, or we didn't understand, and that there was an order, or some laws of the universe that we were subject to, and that there was nothing we could do about it. In that sense, when Paul says reality is that which governs, if you mean it in that way, I completely agree with him.
Mm-hmm.
It governs in a sense that you cannot avoid it.
Yeah, that's what he means. Yeah,
and that's why I said, that's why I quoted Philip K. Dick, because it goes to the same thing. I don't care if you don't believe in it; it's still there. It'll govern. It'll govern your actions. But here, then we get into the discussion of, how does it govern? And that's where we get into the distinction, perhaps, between what Paul uses the term God 1 and God 2, which I found extremely useful, because I'm a firm believer in God 1. I mean, there's no doubt about it. If I understand his meaning properly, I think I do by now. But
well, for people who might be listening to this who haven't heard Paul, could you just run through what God 1 and God 2 is?
Well, God 1 would be this stand-in for so it would be a non-active God, right? So a God that represents the immutable laws of the universe, which you can just simply call the Logos. Now, the Logos is, to me, that's what it represents. It's God 1. It represents all the laws of the universe to which we are subject, and which we really can't do anything about. Now, we have to be careful, because when we talk about the human world, once consciousness emerges and free will emerges, then what emerges at the same time is a new branch of natural law, and that's the normative order of natural law. So, the descriptive law, like the laws of physics, we can't avoid them. I mean, we can work around them. We can build contraptions that, like airplanes, that seem to defy gravity, but they don't really defy gravity, right? Well, we know how they work. So an airplane does not suddenly cancel the law of gravity, right? It still obeys the law of gravity. We just figure out a way to sort of counteract it with different forces. When it comes to normative laws of the universe, it gets a lot more complicated. And that's where people will say, "Oh, natural law, no, that can't be, that can't be, because that makes no sense, right? I mean, who enforces natural law? Not responsible. Well, who enforces the law of gravity?" Right?
So when you're talking about normative law, are you talking about something like Frederick Bastiat's book, The Law?
Yeah, well, all man-made law reflects normative law. In other words, normative law is the law that we, as agents in the universe, have the option to follow or not follow, right?
So would that include...
It's normative in the sense that it says you should, and that's where you get into the whole ought versus is debate, and famous Hume's guillotine and all these.
So it doesn't have to be a formal application of this law.
No.
It could just be the informal.
Right. No. I'm talking the law in the
perception.
The law of gravity was the law of gravity before Newton or Einstein came up with some equations that described it. Right. Mm-hmm. So the laws of interactions between humans are there regardless. right? But the fact is, they are a very different nature than, let's say, the laws of physics. The laws of physics are the laws that apply to merely complicated systems. When you talk about complex systems, the laws that apply to them are, first of all, of a completely different nature, and they're much, much, much more difficult to describe and to find, right? So when we talk about laws and what humans can do about them, all we can do is discover them. You know, we discover the laws. And then, of course, the man-made law, the positive law, you know, the laws that are actually in the books, like the Constitution and all the, you know, the laws that derive from it, those are supposed to reflect the natural law. And that, you know, the US, the United States, is the only country that I know of that actually takes that seriously in their constitution. And I've lived in many, many other countries, you know, in Europe especially. I've also lived in Korea. The US, you know, when people talk about American exceptionalism, that's what it is. It is the only country that I know of that recognizes that man-made law, the laws that are enumerated in the Constitution and other places, are there to secure our natural rights that are derived from the natural law. So most of the time, this kind of view is associated with people that have a more theistic view of the universe. You know, that say, well, the natural law, yes, but it's derived from God. And I say, no, I don't. I'm not saying that couldn't be true. It's possible, but I don't need a God 2 to explain that. I do need a God 1. God 1 as the logos, as you know, the logic of the universe, the logic of the universe, the laws of the universe that we can't escape, that we are subject to, regardless, that govern us in a sense that I think Paul want to say. I firmly believe in that. But that's different than saying that some agent now, God 2 now, God 2 has agency and can, presumably, now arbitrarily counteract those. Well, they're not immutable anymore. You know, that's the problem that I have. Is that if you believe, you know, of course, C.S. Lewis tried to, you know, come to terms with this dilemma in his book Miracles. He did a great. I mean, C.S. Lewis is a fantastic writer, but I don't think, to me, ultimately anyway, he's not successful. But be that as it may, to me, the problem when you start having a God that can intervene, and I don't know if it's arbitrarily is the right word. I don't know.
I was going to ask you.
That's the thing. But from my point of view, it looks arbitrary, right? Because I don't know if God has reasons or even if he needs reasons. When I say he, it could be she, you know, whatever. You know, but of course, let's use the standard terminology. If God wants to perform a miracle and suddenly basically negate temporarily the laws of the universe, the logos, to accomplish some end, then I guess nothing can prevent that. But to me, that's an issue. That's a problem. And the best way I can illustrate that is my experience when I've traveled to Muslim countries, right? So in Muslim countries, there's a lot of wonderful people there. So this is not, what I'm going to say is not a commentary on the people there, shouldn't be misconstrued. But what you find is it's a general tendency, it's not everybody else like this, but there's a general tendency to be a lot more fatalistic than in Western countries. And clearly to me, that derives from the fact that in Islam, Allah, or the God of Islam, is definitely a God too in people's mind that basically has no problem intervening at any time, any place. Basically, you know, the expression inshallah, if Allah wills it. It's people, no kidding, in their mentality, of course, they don't push it too hard because, of course, reality comes to, you know, it's still there. So, but there is that sense that people very often will say, well, you know, what I do really doesn't matter very much because if Allah wants it to happen, it'll happen. And if He doesn't, it won't. There's nothing much I can do about it. So when you push it that far, yeah, I start having a huge issue with God too. Because to me that, you know, it's counterproductive. And I don't know how to reconcile that. You know, I don't know, maybe Paul will watch this video and maybe he'll comment on it and help me reconcile this. Because I'm not completely closed to the possibility of a God too. It's just like right now in my state of intellectual development, I have a hard time reconciling it with the orderliness of the universe, right? If I start taking God too seriously, to me, it's like it destroys my comfort with the fact that at least the universe is knowable, at least it follows some laws. We may not know what all the laws are, but at least in theory we can discover them. It's a laborious process to discover them, particularly when we talk about the laws of complexity. It's very difficult. But at least it's theoretically possible to kind of get an inkling of what those laws might be, right? So to me, that's comforting. You know, maybe it's just a psychological thing. But to me, it's more comforting than knowing that there might be this agent out there who, on a whim, could just destroy my life. I mean, obviously, if we suppose God is goodness, it shouldn't happen. But I do observe that some people sometimes, I mean, have their lives pretty much destroyed. No, I, you know, at times my life has not always been very easy. I mean, overall, I'm very blessed, and you know, I'm very, very grateful for everything I have. But it's a difficult concept for me to grapple with, you know. And so,
well, okay, so I'm just going to throw a little bit of something in here. Maybe we can talk about it again at some time in the future. You brought up an interesting point when you talk about people who are very fatalistic.
Yes.
But that is one of the reasons that I think Jordan Peterson sees the centrality of the biblical teaching to where we ended up in Western civilization with a concept of personal responsibility, personal accountability, the natural law, distributed cognition. All of these things are not accidental in Western civilization. They arise out of God's word. And
to me, they arise out of...
when we look at the concept of God's will, and I am not a theologian by any means. Maybe we'll have to have Mary on to talk about this, but
that's her area.
I do remember when I was first a very new believer. I was 30 years old when I became a believer. And one of the things that I was introduced to was this idea of God's perfect will and God's permissive will. And those are two different things, two different aspects to God. And God is not a God of whim. That is what differentiates him from the panoply of Greek and Roman gods and
right.
and the gods of emotion, because the words that we have to describe God through the Bible are words like God is love, God is gracious, God is compassionate, God is perfect. We have a lot of adjectives to describe God, but the one noun that we have to describe God is that God is love. And the other main adjective that sort of puts all the other adjectives together is that God is good. And that, I don't know if you heard the discussion that I had with Sherry and Esther, or Sherry and Mary, about this idea that, at least for us, there is a picture that the universe is headed towards something that is good. That there's a There's a shape to things. And I sort of heard you talking about that even when you were talking about the idea of having just the right amount of randomness in systems that allows systems to function. And that, you know, from your perspective, those systems have become what they are because of the randomness, and therefore it's not surprising that it's just the right amount of randomness. But both sides of that equation sound as though what's happening is something that is, at least at this point, functional. I know you can argue a lot about whether or not the world is, all the systems are amoral, you know, one animal eats another and all of that stuff that people get so worked up about. But
yeah, I do worry about these things, but it's a different discussion.
Yeah. And those are all food for discussion, you know, they would be great for discussion another time. I do have to go, but
Yes.
This has been
No problem.
so enlightening. I've really learned a lot from you, Karl, and I hope we get to talk again.
Yes, I will. I'm particularly, because I particularly want to learn more from you or anybody, you know, on Paul's channel or anybody associated with it to learn more about your interpretation of, especially the relationship between the God one and God two concepts, right? So that's of great interest to me, because I think I explained to you, you know, where I saw the, you know, maybe the dilemma, or I don't know if dilemma is the right word, but the difference between the two, and, you know, how to reconcile the two. I'm sure Paul would have, well, he's sort of addressed it, of course, in the past, but so far not to my entire satisfaction anyway.
Well, that's what keeps us asking, right?
That's
Because
right, that's right.
the question is a gift. I really believe that. Having a question is a gift. So we have a question and we can move forward on and we can keep learning.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.